guests are phenomenal and exceptional people, and this is no exception to the rule. I read this book just a few days ago. I couldn't drop it. I just couldn't drop it. I wrote an article about this book. I did an audio podcast on this book, a singular audio podcast. I did a YouTube video on this book, and now I just said, let me reach out to the author. He may answer. You know, these authors are very big. They're big people. Like, let me just give it a shot. Then I sent him a DM, and we are having this conversation right now. Mr. Jimmy Sonny, welcome to the Falto podcast. I'm very
Right.
honored.
Thanks for having me, man. It was great. You were like, I couldn't say no. You know, you had done, you had said so many nice things about the book. I was like, listen, I got to talk to this guy just to make myself feel a little bit better. You know, it was like it was so nice of you. But I appreciate you reaching out, and I'm excited to chat. I also the tabs on the book. It's always fun because I don't know what caught your attention and what didn't. So it's
Yeah,
always fun to engage with somebody because I'm always interested to see like what hit, what didn't hit, that kind of stuff.
yeah, very, very fascinating. First question I want to ask you is, how did this experience? It took you 6 years to write this book. How did it change you? Because I know how it changed me. How
Oh,
did it?
yeah. I mean, there's it, it changed everything. It was by far the longest book project I've ever done.
Hmm.
It was certainly the most taxing in terms of just raw research, interviews, everything else. And I would say, um, at the end of it, how did I change? I would say one is I just have a real stronger appreciation for what it takes to do startup entrepreneurship.
Hmm.
Like I'd written other books before, but never a book about a startup, and I didn't really appreciate just exactly how hard it is to build a startup and to make something from nothing, and then to take it public, and then to sell it, and all of that. I had to learn those details very intimately, and it gives me a newfound respect for the people who do it. I would say that's one way. The second is, I kind of I came to appreciate the the fact like that a sector of the economy in the United States exists that is like this, that is this dynamic, right? And so, when you walk into the grocery store every day, you are generally interacting with brands that have been around for a long time,
Yeah.
right? Um, and so a lot of our interactions are with brands that, I mean, I'm on a Mac laptop, right? Apple's been around since the 80s, and so it was I think what I discovered that I didn't really know before or didn't really appreciate before is just like how important it is to have a sector of the economy that is this dynamic and that basically is just trying to always plow itself under, right? Is always trying to reinvent itself. So I walked away with an appreciation for that. And then I would say the other thing is like walked away with a whole new set of experiences. Like I had the chance to interview some of the most interesting people in the world, ask them a lot of crazy questions, travel all over and kind of get into their lives and get to know their families and stuff. And it was just fun. Like I walked away with 6 years of just like having this extraordinary chance to do this. And so a lot of different things. And then for me also personally, it was a big project that I wasn't sure would work
Yeah.
and it did. And so that's been very cool and very exciting. And I think that's another kind of lasting impact is that this was something I look back on and I'm really proud of how it came together.
Oh, fantastic, fantastic. There was a particular guy that gave Peter Thiel some money in the starting of his business. They were playing chess together. And the guy said, the reason why I'm giving you this seed capital is because of the intensity at which you played chess. I know that if you put your heart in anything, it will succeed. I always tell my clients that how you do one thing is how you do everything. And it's all over this book from when they were racing with each other. Can you talk to us about, those things?
Yeah, that's a really good insight. And I didn't really, I hadn't made that connection directly. I mean, I had obviously interviewed this person. So here's the backstory on that.
Yeah.
It's actually kind of a cool backstory. Um, I had been given some of the documents, like the early documents for Confinity, which was the company that was one of the two companies that's a precursor to PayPal. Confinity, for those who are listening, creates a product called PayPal, and Confinity is started by Max Levchin and Peter Thiel. And so I get these documents and they're financing documents. And on the cap table, there's listed this one name. Everyone else kind of like is like institutional names, right? So funds or banks or whatever. And then you have this one person who like is on his name is on this document. And I had not heard his name before. And so I do some Googling and I find out that he's some musician in San Francisco. And I was like, huh? That's a little weird. Like he's not like a tech person. He's just like some guy. He's like a music guy. And so I reach out and I didn't find any other contact info other than a phone number. So I called his phone number and I left a voicemail. And my voicemail basically, said something like, hi, my name is Jimmy Soni. You don't know me. I'm writing this book about PayPal. You might not even be the person that I'm supposed to call, but your name was on this document where it says you gave money early to the company. And if it's you, I would love to talk to you about it and like why you invested and all that stuff. So if you give me a call back. And I think it was like, it didn't take me long, like 10, 15 minutes. He called me back, which I was not expecting. Right. And so then he calls me back and he ends up telling me that the reason that he decided that he was going to invest was because he was playing competitive chess at the time in California. And he was playing competitive chess. And every time he met this guy, Peter Thiel, across the boards, Peter was so intense about these chess games. And so when Peter came to him and said, listen, I have this company, it's called Confinity, we're raising money, this is our kind of friends and family round, would you want to contribute? He said he didn't tell Peter this, he told me this. He said, the reason that I invested, because it was a substantial amount of money.
Yeah.
He said, but I did it right away. He goes, because when I played chess against this guy, he was merciless. That was the word he used. I think it was merciless. He was merciless in his style of play. So I knew that he would be successful in anything he put his mind to. And so it was a really interesting moment because you have somebody that he's not a professional investor. He's not somebody that has like tons of money and can throw it at anything, but he decides to make this investment and it ends up becoming a pretty lucrative investment. Yeah. And he does it entirely on the basis of Peter's style of chess playing, right? And so I thought it was kind of a cool anecdote. And you are right that there is a part of it which speaks to the idea that you were talking about, how you do anything is how you do everything. And I would say that one way that these people do anything, many of them, is that they are very, very, very competitive. Mm-hmm. And so that competitiveness translates into building a company. Yeah. And I would argue that one of the reasons that PayPal was successful was because of that competitive engine, right? It was internal. They were competing with one another a lot of times, but it was visibly and powerfully external. They had a lot of competition and they simply outworked, out-hustled, outlasted a lot of those competitors. Yeah. And so I think you're right. It's a part of the character of the place. But that initial investment was this very funny story of finding this person literally just through like Googling his name and then finding a phone number.
Great, fantastic. Speaking of, investing in the person before investing in the idea, I really like the narrative of Michael Moritz when Elon Musk met him, and then Sequoia Capital made their first $5 million in investment. I'm sure the guy said, I don't even know what we invested in.
A little bit.
Yeah. They invested in the person, not just the idea. I want to ask you a question. I know you were born in Paris, right?
I was born in Toulouse, actually, Toulouse, France.
In Toulouse, France, yeah. And then your family moved to America.
Mm-hmm.
The intention wasn't even to stay in America, but you guys ended up staying in America. There's a powerful line in the book in the introduction here about Brian Eno.
Yeah.
Yeah, when he was talking about the very fertile sceneries, and he used a word called seniors.
Yeah.
Right? Like a concentration of talents. So the question I was thinking about it, I said, I want to add it with a quote by Warren Buffett. He said, I won the ovarian lottery by being born in America. So Jimmy, I want to ask you a question. If you didn't move to America, do you think you would have written this book?
No. That's an easy one for me because I got very lucky in the set of circumstances that led me to be in the United States. My parents are Indian, both born in India. The plan was always to go back there. My dad gets a postdoc in France. We end up in France somehow. I'm born there. And then he gets a job in America, and they come to America with the intention that they're eventually going to go back to India, and we stay for forever, like for a very long time. And so it is funny because every opportunity I've had in my life, whether it's writing books or my friends or pretty much anything in my life, is a kind of happy accident, right? And so I feel profoundly grateful for that. Like it's like it's funny. I meet all of these immigrants who are a little bit like me, and we're more patriotic in many cases than native born Americans. And I think it's because we don't take our place in the country for granted. Like
Mm.
I know I'm lucky to be here, and I know that my citizenship was something that I didn't get just because I was born here. My parents had to earn it. They had to take a test, and they had to sign documents, and they had to go back and forth and deal with visas and stuff. And so there's something about that that like makes me very grateful. Like I'm a very proud American. And I think that there's no doubt in my mind I could never have written this book if I was living in another country. It'd be impossible. It'd be impossible because I wouldn't have the access. I probably wouldn't even become interested in these people in the same way. Publishing in other countries is not as mature as it is, like book publishing is not as mature an industry as it is in the United States. A lot of best-selling books abroad are still originally published in the United States and then sent abroad. And so there's just like a thousand reasons why this book never would have happened if I was living anywhere else. And truth told, it's also like I was drawn to this story partly because so many of the people at the heart of it had that same experience of being immigrants, right? And so there's something about it that like I I know what it means. Like I know what a lot like their lives might not have looked exactly like mine, but there were some echoes there that I knew I could capture probably better than other writers.
Great. Off the back of your intense experience in researching, and your research process was massive. Researching you alone, I'm learning a lot about the book business. What are some of the things that you look at when you look at a business and you go like, they are going to be successful or they are not going to be successful?
Oh man, I mean, I'm probably the wrong person to weigh in weigh in on that. Just because I'm not a venture capitalist, right? I wrote a book about one business, but to the extent that Founders tells you anything, one of the things that it certainly points to is that um, the the team, the early team in particular,
Yeah.
matters so much, and in some ways matters more than whatever the product idea is. Because the
Mm.
story of PayPal is the story of one company, Confinity, creating money beaming technology.
Yeah.
So for listeners, the original PayPal product, what was called PayPal, was a way to beam money between Palm Pilots. So you would use the infrared port on your Palm Pilot. A lot of people listening won't even know what this is, but
Yeah.
because this technology is now in a museum. But you would beam money between these kind of like ancient iPhones, let's say, right? And it was glitchy and it was error ridden and it was like not, it had a ceiling on its success. That evolves to become the PayPal that is still around today, 20 plus years later, right? And still used today. It's still growing today. Like it's
Yeah.
like kind of crazy.
Yeah.
The other company was X.com, and they were going to be like the bank, the super bank of the future. And they evolved to become also a money transmitting business that combines with PayPal to build this bigger money transmitting business. And so the thing that you discover in that is that like business plans change on a dime in Silicon Valley.
Mm.
You are, in many cases, simply betting on the quality of the people at the heart of the business to make something work, right?
Yes.
It is very rare that a plan conforms or that the outcome conforms exactly to the plan. So that's not an exact answer to your question because I don't go around looking at businesses and saying what's going to work or what's not going to work. But I do think that one of the lessons from this book is that team dynamics, team strength, intellect, like hustle, prior successes, prior failures, early team relationships, all of these things play an incredibly profound role, and they are not things that would necessarily ever be captured on a PowerPoint that you're presenting to a venture capital firm.
Great. Great. In the book, Elon Musk said something very powerful. He said that if you get the question right, the answer will take care of itself. I love the way they pivoted to pivot to email. When I think it was Reid Hoffman that asked Max I can't pronounce that last name properly.
Levchin.
Yeah, Max Levchin. He said, "What if somebody misplaces their Palm Pilot? I just paused. I'm like, whoa. Tell me about the power of questions. Because you also have questions where you, when you're researching, you said that you have like some document in your laptop. This book should be written. Why is this book not written? What's
Yeah.
the power of a question?
Yeah, I think, it's a good, I mean, no pun intended, it's a good question. So just, take a step back. Like a lot of truly great businesses, I think begin from a, a really just a very simple set of questions, right? Um, I would say closer to home for me, all of my book projects have begun with the question, well, why can't I buy this book already? Like, why doesn't it exist already? Right. So every project I've done basically springs from a desire to buy the project at the very end of it. Right. Like the truth is, if like I had my ideas and somebody else went out and did them, I probably wouldn't write them. Like in fact, I know I wouldn't write them because I don't like doing copycat books. And so um, I think that's true in businesses too. Like you kind of get this sense that like all of these great businesses begin from somebody saying, "Well, why doesn't this exist already? It's kind of silly. It should exist." And then there's just a whole bunch of other things that have to happen after you ask the question,
Yeah.
right? But I think that's part of the wisdom that's baked into the Elon quote is sometimes like the real thinking happens in asking the right question.
Right.
Um, and I would say there's like, there's then if you're looking at a book, for example, you ask the original question, why doesn't this exist? And then you have to ask the like follow-up questions, right? Follow-up questions are like, well, maybe a version of it exists, but it didn't find an audience. Why was that? A version of it exists, but it was badly written. Why was that? Am I the right person to do this
Very
this
good.
particular book, right?
Very
There's all these other things that are at the heart of that. And so I don't want to go like too philosophical with it because I think for a lot of people this is going to sound sort of blatantly obvious. Like, of course, these things start with questions, but here's what I would say: once you ask the question, I do find that among even my friends and people I know, there are different kinds of people. There are people I know who, once they ask the question, if they get an unsatisfactory answer, they become obsessed with the question itself. And
Mm.
then there are people where, like, if they ask the question and they get an unsatisfactory answer, they just move on. And I find that the doers, the creators in my life, are people who, when they ask the question, why doesn't this exist, become obsessed with the fact that the thing doesn't exist,
Mm.
right? And so I certainly put myself in that category on my best days because if I find out that a book doesn't exist and it should exist, I can't stop thinking about it. Like I can't have productive conversations with anybody else about anything. I'll give you an example. I'm not going to say the name of it because it's still an exciting idea to me, but I had this idea for a book yesterday and I had a lot of other things to do yesterday. The book I think should exist doesn't exist. I can't buy it. And yesterday I spent 2.5 hours just like going down rabbit holes to figure out why doesn't this book exist? Like this makes no sense. This book is so obvious. It should so obviously exist. Why doesn't it exist?
Yeah.
And so now I'm like obsessed. And the problem is it's become like an obsessive distraction when I have other things I am committed to and
Yeah.
working on, right? But that to me, that's like the piece of it that's most important is that at some point some weird thing happens in the world, you become obsessed and you're like, I just got to keep going. Like I have to keep going until this thing is solved, right?
Yeah.
And that's why these particularly startup businesses I think begin from these like very fundamental first principles type of questions.
Very, very good. Very, very, very powerful. Let me just add to that before I ask you my next question. So I journal every morning. I've been doing that for 12 years because my last son is
Wow.
12 years old. Yes, every morning. I've got a
Wow.
pile of journals like this, gratitude journaling. And then so because of this book, I started a new process. So I pick one of my core values.
Hmm.
It was respect. Then I asked myself, because I mean, I geeked out on questions on this book. I said, Paul, how can you live this value today? What is the one step you will take today to show respect to yourself and more respect to the people around you? And Jimmy, that's a very powerful question.
Hmm.
Very, very deep. In
Hmm.
fact, I even added them uh, no, 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 no. Charlie Munger's quote about reversing the inversion. I said,
Oh yeah, inversion.
one thing that I will do today that will make me come across as disrespectful to somebody or to myself.
Hmm.
I didn't want to go to the gym today. But I said, if I don't go to the gym today, that would be disrespectful to myself because I said I was going
Yeah.
to. So I did it.
Yeah, and I
James
think
said something. He said, friction in every business is like the fat that must be taken away. I love that line.
hmm.
Love that line in this book, right?
And I
So how
think
did you, I know that you put some constraint in yourself for this book in researching you. It was very, very good. Where are you writing your phone and all of that stuff? How do you add constraint to yourself and how do you remove friction in the writing process?
yeah, I would say a couple of constraints. You know, you're always constrained by word count, so that helps because you only have so many words you can play with. I would say sometimes when I'm editing, I like to edit on a phone so that I'm constrained in the form factor of what I'm editing. So, like the raw material, I will write on a computer, but I will often edit on my phone as a way of just like on a phone, you know, you have to be quick because your thumbs get tired. You have to keep sentences a little shorter because the screen is very small, right? But that's actually a great way to train yourself to write in a pithier fashion, in a way that's more that's just easier for the reader to get through, right? Readers don't like long sentences. Readers don't want flowery language. They want you to get to the point.
Exactly.
I would say another constraint is I often, when I am editing, will print things out and go away from my laptop and my phone. Like I'll go to a park and I
Mhm.
will edit by hand so that there's a constraint of not having access to technology. Because the temptation when you're editing is just to like go down rabbit holes, right? It's like to go to Wikipedia or to go to Reddit or to go to wherever.
Yep.
And one constraint is just constraining yourself from technology and just literally having a paper and pencil when you're editing. Um, I think that and you asked another question, which is just like how do I structure some of this stuff? And the truth is like everybody, all writers I know have their own crazy process, right?
Mhm.
Like we're all a little nuts. Like you kind of have to be to do this kind of work. You have to be a little bit screwed up. Like you're gonna spend you're gonna spend years of your life like researching this company and writing this story. Like, what kind of maniac does this, right? Like, there's so many other things I could be doing that are so much more fun or like so
Yeah.
much more lucrative. Um, but it's my particular brand of vodka. This is like what I like to do, right? And so I would say that one of the things that I try to do is I try to hit a word count every day, right? I try to keep pretty disciplined about it. I don't always follow that procedure perfectly by any stretch, but I
Because
try.
is it because you've ended your coaching relationship with your writing coach that you were giving him that?
Yeah, that was good pickup. No, I mean that it was more she was like kind of bullying me into doing what I
Yeah.
needed to do, and then I got pretty good at it.
Yeah.
And for listeners, it was just that I had this person I was working with who was kind of a coach, and if I didn't send her my word count total for that day, I had to like make a public political contribution, and
Yeah.
those contributions like live in perpetuity in America, and you can always look them up. And so I didn't want to have that happen, so I hit my word count for writing every day. But all writers I know play little games with themselves because these projects, the thing is, imagine a 6 year project is so long,
It's
right?
long.
It's so draining. And like you can't get, you have to find little ways to stay motivated, to stay
Yeah.
going. And you just have to find little tricks and games you play with yourself or like little milestones or awards or like little things you're going to do to rewards to make sure that you're actually going to continue to be motivated. And I would say like those games evolve over time, right? And so you just kind of find your way in and out of them. But for me, those are some of the ways that I use kind of friction and also the opposite, like rewards to actually make myself get the work done.
Great, 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 great. You spoke about Robert Metcalf's network effects in the book. That was very. I mean, I went through the rabbit hole
Oh,
of
sorry.
that's my first son. How you doing?
Hi.
Your
Yeah.
dad's
So
great. He's awesome.
yeah, thank you. Yeah, Jimmy, I believe that your book has network effect because, and I found out that it's because of the quality of the products. Can you speak to network effect even as to creators? The reason why this book has network effect is because number one, the product is great. I'm not saying that because of you. The product is fantastic. All right. So why is that important to a creator, to an entrepreneur, for you to have network effect embedded in the product?
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, it's worth teasing this out a little bit, right? Because I think that for PayPal, network effects, as defined traditionally, were really important because what they did was, there's this the explanation of network effects, or one explanation, is basically that a network is powerful if every new
You,
entrant into the network
yeah,
makes the overall network more powerful for the people who are already there,
yeah,
right? Every new person that joins a phone system makes the phone system more valuable because then I can call you on that phone system, right? Every new person that joins PayPal makes PayPal better because then I can send money to more people in aggregate, right? And so PayPal was one of the first truly viral internet products like this, where the aggregate value increased as the network increased, right? And they created little mechanisms by which they supercharged those network effects. They gave away bonuses for referring and
yeah,
gave away free money for people who signed up,
yeah.
right? And so that in itself is like a case study in how network effects can have a very can be powerful, right? I think you're being generous. My book has done well, but I don't think it has that same. It's not technically an example of network effects, right? Maybe it will be someday. Maybe there's going to be like a club of people who have read the book and are talking to each other or something, and that club becomes more valuable for every new person who reads the book. I don't know, but I think the more specific case study, the framing, is what I was using to explain PayPal, which is the 101st user to PayPal makes the value of PayPal better for the first 100 users, and so on and so forth.
Now, the reason why I brought that up because I had to ask ChatGPT that how can a writer or a creator or a personal brand have network effects?
Hmm.
Yeah, and I will argue against what you said that I'm being kind on, but it's the truth because the more people get to read the book, the more valuable the book becomes.
Hmm.
For example,
Okay.
I have a WhatsApp community of close to 1,000 small business owners. We are reviewing this book next month.
That's great.
Everybody must get a copy of the book. So that's the network effect that, you
Hey
know,
man, I'm not gonna. In that case, let me take back what I said.
yeah, yeah.
Let the network effects reign.
That's
That's
like
great.
that's what I was talking about that. Jimmy, there's something else that I want to ask you a few more questions because I know how busy you are. It's on the power of forgiveness.
Hmm.
It's so powerful. I had to call my brother because my brother was going through exactly the same thing. He's come out of it now. When there was a coup against Elon, when he
Hmm.
was on holiday or he traveled, it was in Europe, something like that, and they removed him as CEO. He got back. I read that letter. The thing that moved me the most, I mean, you really wrote this book, brother. You really wrote this book, man. That it was Peter Thiel that gave him money as well to start his new business, invested in his new business. I told my brothers, like, these guys, the reason why they are great, they're not just great by accident. Oh. They have a large heart. Man, talk to me about the power of forgiveness. And man, man, Give me that line. I was just stuck because I know people are struggling with forgiving somebody in a business. Tell me about
So
that.
so look, I'm glad you brought this up. You picked up on something that I hope more people pick up on. It is one of the most powerful moments in the book. It is one of the most powerful moments in the story of the lives of these people. Um, and I think you're right. You're fundamentally right. Forgiveness, I think, is probably uh, undervalued. It's underutilized. We are bad in general, myself included, at asking for apologies, at making amends, right? It's not something we do well because a million things get in the way. Ego gets in the way. Our own sense of our self-righteousness gets in the way. Time gets in the way. Circumstances get in the way, right? And we find ourselves maybe at the end of our lives like not having apologized to the people that we hurt, or not having like done right by somebody that we feel we did wrong to, right? And so I find it to be an area where, like, frankly, I want to explore more, both for myself and just with the literature, and like how forgiveness operates, what it does, how it can work, what systems work best for actually getting for admitting wrongdoing and then finding a way to make things right. In this story, one of the interesting things is that there's a group of people, for listeners, there's a group of people who are a part of the company that believe that Elon, as CEO, is leading the company in the wrong direction, that he's doing the wrong things with the company. And in the fall of the year 2000, they execute a coup against him while he is on his honeymoon. So the plane takes off for his honeymoon. This group of people goes to the board and basically says, either he goes or all of us go. And it's a huge contingent of the executives and a bunch of people at the company. And so the board meets, they deliberate, and Elon finds out, he flies back. By the time he flies back, he's been removed as CEO. And, half the company is deeply unhappy, half the company is thrilled. Years later, this same group of people, including Peter Thiel and Luke Nosek and others, are among the first to invest in Elon's later ventures, including SpaceX.
Yeah.
And one of the things that Peter had told me when I interviewed him is he said, I wanted to do SpaceX because I believed in Elon and I thought it was a smart business. But he goes, some portion of it was also this sense that I had that we disagreed with Elon. It wasn't that we didn't like him when we did the coup. We just disagreed with where he was taking the company. And I felt like this was a way of, in a way, a small way of setting things right. Is we still think highly of you. I still think highly of you, and I'm going to invest with you, right? And it was kind of this it wasn't okay. It was an investment, so it wasn't exactly an act of forgiveness or an act of contrition. But he, in my talk with him, he said, maybe in hindsight, but he was sort of saying that's kind of part of how I thought about it. Was this sort of makes things right, no hard feelings, man. That kind of thing. And so I think there's something to that, because the other thing is, if you look at the people who what these people did and how they did it later, they all end up collaborating with one another. Many of them are still close to Elon to this day, right? And even though they ousted him in the year 2000, 20 years later, they're still talking with him, serving on boards, investing in things. And so there is something very powerful in this story that even the most, call it the most difficult moment interpersonally, does not prevent future relationships from being built.
Yeah.
And I think there's a powerful lesson in that. And I would say a lesson I need to relearn all the time, right? Mm-hmm. And so I'm not making myself out to be somebody who knows how to do this well. I just think in this story, it's a very powerful moment.
Yeah, very, very powerful. It really got me thinking. I said to myself, I think it was Ryan Holiday that said that the obstacle is the way.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was one of the Stoics that said that the impediment to a path becomes the path. So if the coup didn't happen, do you think we would have Tesla and SpaceX today?
No. And that's not just my assessment, by the way. I mean, I can offer an opinion, but what I have are the interviews that I did with Elon, in which he says, he's like, maybe it's a fortunate thing that I was ousted, because he said I could see myself staying at PayPal and trying to turn it into $1 trillion company, and then I wouldn't have gone on to do other things. There's an engineer who I interviewed who worked closely with Elon, and one of that engineer reflects and says, one of the reasons that Steve Jobs was able to make Apple great and do Pixar was because he was fired from Apple the first time.
Yeah.
And so he says, similarly, it's it was not pleasant that Elon was fired, but it allowed him the time and the room to do Tesla and to do SpaceX. And I think just at the level of basic time and logic, he had time and room after his PayPal years were done to go and do these other things, right? So you can't go and run the same experiment twice, but it does make sense that if he was still the CEO of PayPal, he would not have invested in Tesla and then worked to make that company what it was as CEO. And he wouldn't have had the opportunity to go buy the domain name SpaceX.com and then make reusable rockets a thing, right? And so there's a weird way in which it's it's totally obvious. And at the same time, I think there's a kind of a deeper point, which is, there are a lot of people who, after the experiences that he had sold one company for 8 figures, PayPal made him an even wealthier person. You know, he could have retired and sat on a beach for years and years and years. And what does he do instead? He
Yeah.
stakes his entire fortune on SpaceX and on Tesla
Yeah.
and makes those companies into successes. And that's a level of risk taking that I think is very, I mean, I think it's singular. I don't think there's actually anybody else who takes those kinds
Yeah.
of risks in the way that he does. And at the same time, there's a story there about, you know, there, it's almost like the quirk of fate was that he got fired from this company, but that quirk of fate led to everything else.
Yeah. 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 Speaking about faith, I'll ask two more questions. I'll let you go. There was one time they usually have coffee together before they became big, and then one of them said that this is like the meeting of billionaires, and they all actually became billionaires.
Yeah.
Speaking of, that's a lot of self-confidence. Do you think that's an important trait for an entrepreneur?
I think so. There's a line at the very end of the book from Max Levchin, and I'll get it wrong, but it is something about like actually it's not in Max Levchin. There's other people who talk about um, uh, an entrepreneur has to be this kind of paradoxical person, right? They have
Mm,
to have almost unlimited levels of self-confidence and self-belief to go and build something from nothing, to like go and build something that's brand new. And at the same time, they have to be hyper aware of every way that their company could fail because there are so many ways it could fail, right? And so you have that it's a very interesting thing that as an entrepreneur, you have to be like irrationally optimistic and also rationally pessimistic,
mm,
right? Like you have to have so much optimism about the world that you believe that you could make a dent in it and go out and do this new thing. And at the same time, you have to be totally aware of every way that your company could die. It is a very unique personality type that is able to do that. And I
yeah,
think in some cases that's why people have co-founders, right? They have
yeah,
one people who has irrational optimism and maybe one person who's a little bit more inclined toward pessimism, right? Or you have people who can manage both. And so I think there is something about that that is like this very very interesting characterological paradox where
yeah.
you have to simultaneously believe that the glass is half full and it can get even bigger, and then also see every way in which the glass is half empty and leaking. And it's really quite something.
Yeah. So towards the IPO part of the book, you talked about Rene Girard, the guy that influenced Peter Thiel's thinking a lot. You know, when the world is going mimetic theory, when the world is going this way, he goes this way. So, who are some of the writers that have inspired you? Because you write too. I know you spoke about Michael Lewis.
Mhm.
Who are some of the other writers that really, really inspire you a lot?
Yeah, the challenge with this is it's such a long list, but I'll name a few who are really exceptional. Where part of what you feel when you read them is you just feel envious. You're like, man, you're so good at this. Like you're just
You have
like
written this.
yeah, like you read the book and you're simultaneously captivated and you want to like throw it across the room because you're just so mad that you can't do anything like this, right? And I would say there are like three people that jump to mind for me who are in that category. One is Eric Larson. So Eric Larson writes these incredible histories. One of my favorites is this book that he wrote called The Splendid and the Vile, that's all about Winston Churchill. And he's just so good. It's like it's what's scary about how good he is that every quote in the book comes from an actual document that he has found or like an actual exchange that he's managed to track down. But he's writing about stuff that happened in the 30s and 40s. And then the book is written like a novel. Like it's just paced so well and you're like in it and you're like, "Oh my God, I can't believe how good this is. Like how can this be this good?" Right? Like so you're totally riveted the entire time. And it's maddening. It's so good. You're like, "Oh, this is so good. I wish I could do this." That's one. The second is somebody you mentioned earlier, Candace Millard. I am a big fan of Candace Millard's part of the reason I'm a big fan of them is because she takes subjects who have been covered to death and she
Mhm.
finds some new angle on their lives.
Yeah.
She wrote about Teddy Roosevelt and Winston Churchill, two
Mhm.
of the most written about subjects in human history.
Yeah.
And she manages to find new things about them and tell a fresh story about them, which is like all but impossible to do. It's so tough to do. And I like that. I value newness. I value authors who are trying to do something that's fresh, that's lively, that hasn't been done before. If you're going to do the 13th biography of, I don't know, Barack Obama, like, okay, I'm not really, that's not that interesting to me. Like, unless you found something that I didn't know, right? It's really not that interesting to me. But for Candace to go and do what she did with Teddy Roosevelt and to do what she did with Winston Churchill, I mean, it's so good. It's like I'm in awe of that kind of work. And then the last person is somebody you mentioned, who's Michael Lewis, which is, there are just some people who let's say are like, they are blessed with like Tiger Woods or Michael Jordan like abilities to play the game. And in my particular field of narrative nonfiction and nonfiction writing, there's the Tiger Woods of that game is Michael Lewis. And there is nobody better at the craft of finding engaging, interesting stories and then making them come to life on the page. And so when I look at the people that I'm like, man, if I get to be a fraction of that good, that's what I want to be. It's a gift, and he has a real gift for two things. One is finding those very obscure characters that everybody else is not paying attention to, and then realizing there's a story there, and then just being dogged in his pursuit of the facts and in his pursuit of the truth and in pursuit of that story and telling it in a way that's very lively. And so I'm not the only one to say these things. He has plenty of fans and admirers, but I think I have a deeper level of respect because I know how hard it is to make something interesting on the page and to make something fun on the page. And he manages to do that at a level that still blows me away, no matter how many times I read and reread his books.
Oh, fantastic, man. Jimmy, this has been a fascinating conversation. What did you leave out of the book?
So much, man. It was already too long. The one criticism I got of the book was that it was too long. And I was like, if only you people knew how much I cut out. Like, if only you people knew the hundreds of pages that I did not include, the stories I did not include. I'll tell you one story that did not make it into the book, but that brings us back to the beginning of the conversation, which is how you do anything is how you do everything.
Yeah.
This is a story that's not in the book. So your listeners are getting new material, guys. New material. This is why you should listen to Paul, because he's getting new material. And he had the chutzpah to reach out and really lock down an interview with me. And I admire that as somebody who has to do that. There is this moment that that somebody told me where the Early Confinity team was taking a break from the workday to go to dinner and then was going to come back to the office after. And they had finished up dinner and they had taken 2 cars. The entire team at the time was very small. It fit into 2 cars. And one car was being driven by Max Levchin, and the other car was being driven by Russ Simmons, who was later a co-founder of Yelp. And Peter Thiel got into the car with Russ Simmons, and Max was driving the other car. And Peter Thiel is sitting in the passenger side of Russ's car. The 2 cars exit the restaurant, and somehow they find themselves subtly and then not so subtly racing to get to the office. And so they start going faster and faster and faster down the streets of Palo Alto. And so they're zooming and there's like a red light or something. And Peter's like, just go through it, Russ, just go through it. And all this stuff happens. They're racing. Russ's car makes it into the office parking lot before Max's car by a nose. He's there first. He parks the car. Peter gets out and raises his hands in triumph and starts dancing around, right? And you have to say to yourself, this is over getting back to the office faster. This is what we're competing on, right? And I remember Russ telling this story in this super evocative way where he was like, man, and Peter was like, just go, Russ, go. And he's like, Peter's my boss. He's the CEO of the company, right? So I can't not listen to him, but at the same time, I don't want to die, right? I have to actually be a reasonable person here. And so it was just so funny because it was this totally inconsequential thing of how fast can we get back to the office? Yeah. And they were competing even at that. And then you heard story after story like this. They would compete to get a math puzzle that was put on a board faster than everybody else in the office. They would compete at chess games at the IPO party. They competed at card games while working at the office. They competed at video games that they would play on Saturdays and Sundays at the office. So competition was very much in the air, but it even affected how fast they wanted to get back to work
Yeah.
after going to dinner. And so it's one of the stories I did not have the space to put in the book, though maybe in telling it to you, I should have.
Great, man. Thank you so much. So, Jimmy, I saw an 11-year-old video of Peter Thiel when an official in Louisiana says that they can't launch PayPal, can't do business there. It was an old 2-minute video, 11-year-old. He said he tracked the guy.
Mm-hmm. They did. They found the guy.
Oh,
And
man.
they got them to turn Louisiana back on, and it
Yeah,
came at a
yeah,
very
I'm
pivotal moment for the company's IPO. It was a super, super, super important moment. One of the investors called it like, I think it referred to as like the ultimate rabbit out of a hat, because if they hadn't had that, if that hadn't happened, for listeners, what would have happened is the company was about to IPO. Louisiana says, you don't have a money transmitter license. We're going to shut you down in the state of Louisiana. And the worry was not about one state. The worry was that Louisiana would have had this domino effect where all these other states all of a sudden would not have been willing to allow PayPal to run. And this is just before the IPO. And so Peter has to go down and play this game. He has to find the regulator. It's during Mardi Gras. So he tracks the regulator down and has to convince him not to shut PayPal down in the state of Louisiana. And I just want to, it's an important moment, because I think it's tempting to look at these people today. They have a lot of wealth. They have a lot of influence. They are in the news all the time. And to think that they were always this way. Remember that at one time, they were tracking down regulators in Louisiana to see if they could keep their freaking product on, right, while they were trying to keep their company alive. Like, it's important, I think, to remember that a lot of the success stories didn't start out as success stories. They started out as just like a lot of people who might be listening, a startup entrepreneur who every day wakes up worried if they're going to fail.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Jimmy Sonny, for coming on the Paul.
Paul, thank you for tracking me down, man. You really read the book, man. I gotta say, I can't even remember some of those stories until you asked about them. I was like, man, that's like, wow, Robert Metcalf, network effects. So I really appreciate the close read. And it's like, look, I wrote the book for people like you. I wrote the book because I in my head, I was like, there's gonna be somebody like Paul who like reads this and is like, whoa, and is like really getting all these little nuggets that I tried to put in. So I really appreciate the close read that you did of the book. I'm so glad we did this. I hope we can do a round 2. I think it'd be fun to do a round 2, maybe with that WhatsApp group that you mentioned.
Yes, exactly. That'll be good. Maybe you don't let the secret out. What's the next book you're working on? Maybe you can keep that to yourself.
I'll keep that to myself, but then we can talk about it the next round.
Yes, thank you so much, Jimmy. I am so grateful.
Thanks, Paul.
Have a fantastic day. The episode drops next week. I'll send you snippets of it and links to it.
Great.
When it drops. Thank you so much.
Sounds great. Thank you.
Yeah, but just wait a little bit. Let it upload.
Yeah.
No, you can go off, but don't shut off.
Okay, got it. All right. Thanks, Paul.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay.
Yeah.